If one day life took away everything familiar to you, your identity, your job, your wealth, your relationships, your health, even the future you once imagined, what would you still live for? Hello everyone, I'm Manya. Welcome to Life Wisdom. Today, I want to introduce you to Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. This is not an ordinary self help book. It was born in one of the darkest places in human history, the Nazi concentration camps. Frankl was a psychiatrist and a concentration camp survivor. His parents, his wife, and his brother all died during the war and in the camps. He lost almost everything. And yet, it was precisely under those extreme conditions that he discovered the core force that can sustain a human being. What we truly need is not merely pleasure, not merely success, but meaning. As Nietzsche once said, he who has a why to live can bear almost any how. In today's episode, we'll talk about what man's search for meaning is really about and why this book speaks not only to concentration camp survivors, but also to every ordinary person living with pressure, anxiety, and uncertainty. Man's search for meaning is roughly divided into two parts. The first part is Frankl's personal experience in the concentration camps. He does not write a grand historical narrative. Instead, he writes about the inner life of an ordinary prisoner: hunger, cold, humiliation, fear, numbness, shattered hope, and the gradual stripping away of the human self under extreme circumstances. The second part is the psychotherapeutic theory he developed from these experiences, logotherapy. It focuses on one question: how can people discover a reason to keep living even in the midst of suffering? Some things will not get better. Some losses can never be repaired. But when suffering is unavoidable, a person can still choose not to let that suffering happen in vain. Life in the concentration camps was a systematic deprivation of humanity. Prisoners were stripped of their names and left only with numbers. They were stripped of their possessions. Even their hair was shaved off. They were stripped of privacy, dignity, and even the ability to imagine a future. But Frankl discovered that even under such extreme conditions, human beings still retained one final freedom: the freedom to choose their attitude in any given set of circumstances. The environment can wound a person, a system can oppress a person, fate can shatter a person. But Franco saw that even inside the concentration camps, there were still people who walked from hut to hut comforting others. There were still people who gave their last piece of bread to someone weaker than themselves. There were still people who preserved their dignity in the face of death. Human beings are not merely mechanical products of their environment. Franco reminds us that between stimulus and response, there is always a space. That space may be very small, but it is where human dignity resides. Franco also points out a common spiritual crisis. Many people do not know what they truly long for or why they are living. When a person loses their inner direction, they can easily fall into one of two states. One is conformity. Whatever people around me are pursuing, I pursue too. The other is being defined by the outside world. Whatever society, family, or public opinion expects me to become, I try to turn myself into that person. And so people begin chasing the things that are widely considered worth having: greater achievements, a more respectable identity, better living conditions, more recognition, greater influence, and a life that appears more successful. There is nothing inherently wrong with these things. But the question is, why do we often feel emptier the more we chase them? Today, we can contact people at any time, access knowledge at any time, and entertain ourselves at any time. And yet, strangely, easier connection has not necessarily made us feel less lonely. More choices have not necessarily given us clearer direction. More stimulation has not necessarily made us feel more fulfilled. If a person does not know why they are living, then no amount of entertainment can do more than temporarily numb the emptiness. No amount of achievement can prevent success from turning into a new source of anxiety. Many people ask during difficult times, "What is the meaning of my life?" Frankl reminds us that the truly important thing is not that we ask life for meaning, but that we realize life is asking us questions. How will you treat the person in front of you today? How will you handle this difficulty today? How will you face the facts you cannot change today? What is something that only you can do today? This is crucial because the question, "What is the meaning of life?" can feel far too abstract. But "What is life asking of me today?" is much more concrete. If you have lost your job, perhaps life is asking you, how will you take stock of your skills and rebuild your life? If you are ill, perhaps life is asking you, how will you learn to care for your body and live in a healthier, more balanced way? If you are taking care of your family, perhaps life is asking you, are you willing to express love through ordinary, repetitive tasks? If you feel lost, perhaps life is asking you, can you first complete the one thing right in front of you that most needs to be done? Meaning is not something we think up in the abstract. It is something we live out through concrete responses. Frankl believed that people can discover meaning in life in three ways. 1. Through creation and work. Creation can be simple and humble. It can mean completing a task, writing an article, taking care of a child, repairing something, cooking a meal, solving a problem, or accompanying someone through a difficult time. The key is not whether the act is grand. The key is this: has something become even a little better because you were there? Sometimes we imagine meaning as something too enormous. We think we must change the world or be seen by many people for our lives to count as meaningful. But in reality, meaning can be found in very ordinary daily life. Doing your work reliably is meaning. Building warmth in a family is meaning. Helping one person suffer a little less is meaning. Creating a bit of order in a chaotic place is meaning. Taking your responsibilities seriously is also meaning. 2. Through experiencing love, beauty, and the world. Meaning does not come only from achievement. It also comes from experience. Frankl wrote that even in the midst of extreme suffering, a person could still be moved by a sunset, mountains, music, the branch of a tree, or the image of a loved one. In that moment, beauty is not a luxury, it is oxygen for the soul. Love is the same. Frankl said that love is the only way to grasp another human being in the innermost core of their personality. True love is not merely possession, dependence, or the satisfaction of one's own needs. It is seeing the essence of the other person, seeing the possibilities that have not yet been realized in them, and helping them become more fully themselves. When you truly love someone, you discover that your life no longer revolves only around yourself. You become willing to take responsibility for another person's existence. And meaning emerges in this act of self transcendence. 3. Through facing unavoidable suffering. This is the most difficult path. Frankl believed that when a person can no longer find meaning through creation and can no longer find meaning through experience, they can still find meaning through the attitude they take toward suffering. But this point must be emphasized. Suffering itself is not meaning. If suffering can be avoided, it should be avoided. If an illness can be treated, it should be treated. If a relationship is toxic, you should leave it or change it. If injustice can be resisted, it should be resisted. Only when suffering is truly unavoidable do we turn to this third path, changing the way we face suffering. There is a deeply moving example in the book. An elderly doctor fell into severe depression after his wife died. He had loved her deeply and could not bear the loss. Frankl asked him, "What would have happened if you had died first and your wife had survived you?" The old man said, "She would have suffered terribly." Frankl replied, "You see, she has been spared that suffering. And it is you who have spared her by taking that suffering upon yourself. Your continuing to live and mourn is the price you are paying for your love." The old man said nothing. He simply took Franco's hand and then left in peace. This is the power of logotherapy. It does not eliminate suffering, but it changes the meaning of suffering. Very often, we cannot choose to avoid loss, but we can choose to let loss become a testament to love. If you are also searching for direction and meaning in life, I invite you to subscribe to this channel. Every Wednesday, I share a book that can help us better understand ourselves and life. Now, let's continue. In Man's Search for Meaning, Frankl offers another profound insight. What human beings truly need is not a complete absence of tension, but the struggle toward a worthy goal. He says, mental health does not mean being perfectly balanced, perfectly relaxed, and completely free of pressure. On the contrary, human beings need a healthy kind of tension, the tension between what I am now and what I ought to become. If a person pursues a life with no responsibility, no challenge, and no goal, that may not be true health. We are not meant to live forever inside our comfort zones. Human beings need to be called toward meaning. So the key question is not, how can I have no stress? The key question is, does the stress I am carrying lead toward something worthwhile? If your stress is purely destructive, if you are being repeatedly humiliated, exploited, or trapped in a relationship without dignity, then what you need is to change your situation. But if your stress comes from a direction you truly identify with, such as learning, creating, caring, taking responsibility, or growing, then that stress may not be your enemy. It may be part of the necessary structure of life. So, how can we tell whether we are moving toward a worthwhile direction? There is a line in the book that works beautifully as a daily practice. Live as if you were living for the second time. and as if you had acted wrongly the first time in the exact way you are about to act now. For example, when you are about to say something hurtful to someone close to you, you can ask yourself, if I had already lost this relationship once because of these words, would I still repeat them now? When you are about to keep postponing an important decision, you can ask yourself, if the version of me 10 years from now look back on today, would they wish I had been a little braver? This practice awakens responsibility, and responsibility is not merely a burden. Responsibility is the doorway to meaning. Once a person knows that they are responsible for someone, something, or some value, they are less likely to give up on themselves so easily. Besides responsibility, Frankl also mentions a spiritual strength that may seem light but is incredibly important, a sense of humor. Frankl said that humor is one of the soul's weapons in the fight for self preservation. It allows a person to create a little distance between themselves and their suffering. Even if that distance lasts only a few seconds, it is precious. In logotherapy, he also developed a technique called paradoxical intention. Simply put, the more a person fears something, the more likely it is to happen. The more they force themselves to achieve a certain result, the more that result slips away. For example, the more afraid you are of insomnia, the harder you try to sleep, and the harder sleep becomes. The more afraid you are of performing badly, the more desperately you try to be perfect, and the more nervous you become. Paradoxical intention reverses the pattern. It uses humor and exaggeration to break the cycle of fear. For instance, if someone is afraid of sweating, Frankl might suggest that the next time they feel nervous, they say to themselves, great, this time I'm going to show everyone just how much I can sweat. And as a result, the fear begins to loosen its grip. Behind this technique is an important ability, self distancing. I have anxiety, but I am not my anxiety. I have symptoms, but I am not my symptoms. I can observe my fear and even make a joke about it. And once I can do that, I am no longer completely controlled by it. When anxiety appears, you can say to it, hello, old friend. You're here again. You can ride along, but you don't get to drive today. This is not denying pain. It is reclaiming a little bit of agency. Frankl goes on to say that human beings are not merely products of genes, environment, childhood, or social conditions. He acknowledges that all of these factors matter, but he firmly rejects reducing a person to nothing but those conditions. For example, nothing but the result of their family of origin, nothing but a personality type, nothing but the sum of their past experiences. Human beings are influenced by conditions, but we still have the ability to take a stance toward those conditions. Sometimes we like to label ourselves as a people pleaser, someone with avoidant attachment, a socially anxious person, a failure, or a victim of family trauma. These concepts can sometimes help us understand ourselves, but if we treat them as destiny, they can become harmful. Understanding the past is meant to help us gain freedom, not to sentence our future. You can acknowledge that you have been hurt and that you have limitations while still choosing to heal and grow. The most precious thing about being human is that we are not only what we have already become, we can also decide what we will become next. Of course, choosing to move toward the future does not mean we will immediately recover from trauma and feel happy again. Healing after trauma is often slower than we imagine. Frankl's description of life after liberation is especially honest. Many people assume that when the gates of the concentration camp opened, survivors would immediately feel overwhelming joy. But Frankl said they did not. They walked onto the grass. They saw flowers, the sky, freedom, and yet they could not feel happiness. Because prolonged suffering can rob a person of the ability to feel joy. Joy must also be relearned. For example, some people do not feel happy immediately after leaving a bad relationship. Some people are finally safe, but still cannot relax. This is completely normal. When someone has lived under long-term stress or trauma, the body and mind need time to believe again. I am safe now. So if you have walked out of a dark period but still do not feel happy, please do not blame yourself. You are not broken. You are still healing. Start with very small things. Eat properly, get some sunlight, take a walk, talk to someone you trust, tidy your room, and slowly let your body understand. The danger has passed. I am allowed to live again. Man's search for meaning reminds us that human beings are not passive objects at the mercy of fate. We can choose our attitude, we can take responsibility, we can love, we can create, we can preserve our dignity even amid suffering we cannot change. Even in the darkest places, human beings can still find meaning. So, before we end today's episode, I'd like to invite you to do a small exercise. Open your Notes app and write down these three questions. 1. What is life asking me to face right now? 2. What person, task, or responsibility is still waiting for my response? 3. If I live today as if it were my second chance at life, what different choice would I make? We cannot control every question life gives us, but we can choose how we answer. Thanks for listening. If this episode inspired you, please like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, what question is life asking you right now? May you find direction in uncertainty, dignity in suffering, and meaning in ordinary life. I'm Manya. See you next time.